Thanks for thanks for having us on to talk a little bit about our international pedagogies toolkit. Just a note again that it will be just me and not Simona this morning, who was initially going to do some of the opening slides and the closing slide. So bear with me as I kind of go through her bits a little bit as well. Um, so I'm from the University of Staffordshire. I'm Impact Evaluation Officer at the university. So mostly my role involves developing sort of evaluative practices across the university, but particularly in the context of access and participation, reducing student inequality, and that's sort of what brought me to support Simona with this project. So we're both sort of chairs of our international student transition team, and we chair the community of practice. So that kind of brings together different university stakeholder groups to kind of discuss what the challenges are for international students in particular, and how to kind of address those. So I'm going to be doing a bit of back and forth in terms of switching slides. So hopefully the second slide has jumped up there. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of the context, understanding the challenges that we're facing as a sector and how that relates to us at the University of Staffordshire, a little bit about how the project was developed, the objectives of our toolkit, what's included in terms of content, and then we'll kind of look at a very early sneak peek of one of our sections. I'll then talk a little bit about measuring the success of the toolkit, how we're going to look at it year on year, some next steps, and then just how you can get in contact if you want to have a chat about the research. So in terms of the challenges, so after a dip in 2024, so UK universities are seeing a bit of a resurgence in terms of international student interest. So with sort of an increase in deposits made by international students from January 2025, so up by 27% from 2024. Also seeing increases in acceptance letters, 14% up in 2025 from 2024. So this is definitely the case for our university as well. We've got students from all over, but the highest proportions come from Pakistan, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, India, but also Canada and France. And so some of the challenges have been outlined by the Russell Group Students' Union in collaboration with the UKISA in a survey which drew nearly 5,000 international student responses. One of the examples of particular difficulty for international students, which definitely translates to our context, is difficulties in terms of making friends with UK students and a lack of sort of inclusive spaces in order to kind of cultivate positive interactions with UK home-based students. Things are changing on that front a little bit at our universities, and there's definitely more work kind of focused on that student transition, hence kind of our work with the International Student Transition team. But also language barriers are a particular challenge. 22% reported finding it difficult to understand regional accents and informal English. And in our research and in this project, we've definitely found that to be the case. So one of the things that we kind of noted was the discussion of IELTS scores. So IELTS scores perhaps not necessarily translating to being able to perform at a high level in terms of the academic and social environment, and to sort of, manage those challenges. So in terms of how we actually developed the project, so the genesis was from Simona's team in course monitoring with course directors and heads of department, where challenges that international students were facing became apparent, and it was in part from referrals by the English for Academic Purposes team, but also issues with plagiarism and academic misconduct. So that's how this project kind of started, and there was a drive towards doing some research and understanding what the context was for these challenges a little bit better. So we developed a theory of change, which has kind of steered this work and the initial research. which consisted of consultation, so focus groups and interviews with both academics, but also international students at the university. We have internally and externally disseminated these findings, and they align a lot with sort of what the Russell Group and UKISA report suggests, as well as what colleagues in the sector have been saying in the last year, as I've been sort of attending conferences and events, the JISC International Conference, for example, digital shock, language barriers, sort of difficulties with socializing as well. So what we decided to do with the findings was speak to all of our a range of different stakeholders across the university to discuss what would be useful to include in a toolkit. So professional services and academics and student support and admissions and recruitment, and then sort of bring all of this knowledge together to sort of make a priority list of what to include in the toolkit. So in terms of the objectives for the toolkit, so we have looked at sort of initially just to raise awareness of some of the challenges that international students face. These it's not a given that a lot of our academics actually understand the context for these challenges. Also to develop effective communication in and out of the classroom, provide effective signposting to support services, which is a particular challenge at our university, and practical strategies for inclusive teaching. So in terms of our toolkit content, so we have 5 sections. They're developed from the research interviews that I discussed earlier on with academics and students, internal conversations with colleagues, and sector conversations as well. In terms of general text content, all of our sections, all of our sort of pedagogic sections, so that would be the first 3, inclusive pedagogy, assessment, feedback, and communication, have sort of check your practice, self-reflection activities, tools and resources, knowledge check quizzes, and some are going to have submersive activities, so sort of role play, real life scenarios where academics can actually interact with international students and sort of follow different pathways to effective communication, effective signposting, and all sections also include sort of wider resources to engage with and CPD opportunities. In terms of the inclusive pedagogy section, so what we're looking to do with this is to build understanding of the student journey and different cultures, to identify and mitigate unconscious bias, understand the hidden curriculum, what is inclusive practice in terms of international students, and how can it be built into learning and teaching. And as it sort of informed as well by decolonization processes, approaches, understanding how to internationalize the curriculum a bit more, how to ensure reading lists are globalized, are looking at different cultures and perspectives, and case studies, and what is acceptable to include in assessments, and practical work. Takes into account sort of the global context and ensures that students have the opportunity to not just to use the UK context, but go far beyond that. In terms of assessment and feedback, looking at kind of the purpose of assessment and feedback, different types of assessment, how to design inclusive assessment, enhancing feedback technique, understanding plagiarism and mitigating it. And for communications, this is where some of our sort of submersive learning, such as ThingLink, submersive technologies such as ThingLink and Verti will come in, creating those sort of scenarios where you can interact with students. So introductions, getting names right, pronunciation, setting the right expectations at the beginning, overcoming barriers to intercultural communication, creating and managing inclusive communication environments, and also digital communication. And the last 2 sections are sort of a little bit less about pedagogy and more about supporting international students. So in our additional support section, this would we'd include a table of staff roles where you can link to different departments that have an international student focus to understand sort of how to effectively signpost, but also guidance on how to what flags are that international students might need support, and how to effectively and efficiently signpost those students. This section also will help us to signpost to different toolkits and guides. So this toolkit's kind of been informed also by other toolkits that we have at the university, including the Ethnicity Degree Awarding Gap Toolkit, but also training on inclusive pedagogies, including neurodiverse inclusive pedagogies and racially inclusive pedagogies as well. So all of those work streams we see as kind of sitting alongside this, and there'll be a lot of sort of cross signposting in our toolkit to other work at the university. And the final section is just a full collated section by section resource list of everything in the toolkit. So we see this as a bit of a package that our academics can jump into and jump out of. They're not necessarily expected to go through sort of a 5-section module in one go or in the space of a week. It's sort of a dip in, dip out kind of resource to kind of align with priorities that other priorities that staff will have, and obviously time limitations. So I'll jump into a sort of a sneak peek of our inclusive pedagogy section now, if I can just hopefully share that. So if someone could just let me know, please, once you can see the screen.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the toolkit has been put on Blackboard, but so initially we've designed this on Adobe Express, not fully designed. There's definitely going to be some changes along the way, but the idea of Adobe Express is just to kind of make it aesthetically a bit nicer. It also enables different formats, so a lot of the content is currently in PDF, but you can also download images which enable that sort of integration of animations and videos as well. Our Verti and ThingLink sort of submersive activities will be via a link. So that's the only way to integrate it on Blackboard. But the reason we chose Blackboard is basically because in our consultation with staff, that was what was asked for. It was the most seen as the most accessible and used platform, and we wanted to ensure that staff got something they would use first and foremost. But our digital pedagogies team also recommended this for integration with immersive technologies. It also helps us with the monitoring and evaluation of the toolkit. So with data analysis of engagement, which will then steer follow-up sort of training and support and development of the toolkit over time. So in terms of our sections, so as you can see, only the inclusive pedagogy section is up at the moment. We've got a little module evaluation section here, which we are going to be doing some evaluation for the toolkit, and I'll come into that a little bit later. But it's a classic sort of Blackboard setup. I don't know, some colleagues will have used this and some not, but you've got your main section sort of outlined, and you've got sort of subsections within that. Sorry. So I'll jump into the first section, which is just kind of a welcome. And the good thing about Blackboard as well is it's got different sort of, the good thing about Blackboard is you've got different sort of accessibility functions, so sort of audio and reading out. So I'll jump into the welcome. So it's just a quick welcome to the module. And you click on the PDF, it's also downloadable. Again, it's integrated with audio software, so it can be read out to academics as well. And so these have been uploaded with sort of PDF, and it's just obviously not finished, very much in draft form, so it's going to look a lot different over time. But we've also got, if I just jump to this one, so you can add knowledge checks. So this, for example, is a check of your knowledge of the academic knowledge of the student journey, and it's sort of basic questions about sort of what that journey looks like. And so obviously this is the instructor view, so we've got the correct answers here, but that would be sort of an early knowledge check, and then it would dive into the main section itself to kind of debunk some of those biases. But we've also got, I'm just aware of constant time here, so I know we've not got too much longer left, so I'll jump out and wrap up the slides. But we've also got knowledge check sections and tips and tricks in every single section. So that's just to check academics practice, a bit of a self-reflection activity of sort of what inclusive pedagogies, for example, is to academics, and how does that align to what they actually do already, and easy wins and tips and tricks. And I'll see if I can jump into one quickly just to show you. I think it's this one. There we go. So check your practice. So this will look more like a checklist once it's done. Again, you can download that PDF, and it's just looking at specific areas of inclusive pedagogy and being able to map that against what academics are actually doing at the moment. So I'm just going to share back to my slides now. Okay, and if someone could just let me know once that's back on the screen.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so in terms of measuring the success of the toolkit, so we're going to be looking at, we're developing a few evaluation activities mapped to our theory of change, the research outcomes, so some of those findings from our research interviews and focus groups, as well as the sort of toolkit design objectives that we've kind of consulted with internal and external stakeholders on. So looking at engagement, ongoing monitoring of how the toolkit's being used, whether it's being used, and we'll also be integrating surveys just to assess the effectiveness and provide insights into whether the format is appropriate, whether it's usable and the content's relevant to need. So that's something that we'll be updating on an annual basis. But also looking at impact. So those surveys will include questions about how the toolkit is being used in practice, whether it's being used in practice, and this will be combined to other surveys. So we also have an inclusion survey at the institution. So there's items on there that will be mapped to specific toolkits, and we're able to kind of ascertain whether our toolkit's hitting the mark in that sense as well. And as I said, this will be done on an annual basis. So we'll be reviewing these surveys, but having conversations with our community of practice, looking at internal surveys such as module feedback, course feedback, and the NSS, as well as looking at sort of trends in policy and sector changes. And so in terms of next steps, which is my final slide, apologies for going a little long there. So we need to finish the toolkit, which will be done by August 2025. From there, we're going to soft launch the toolkit by September, full launch in November 2025, in time for International Students' Day, which is an event we're running with our Students' Union, and annual review of engagement and content in June, and we'll be doing supplementary training alongside that. So that's that. Thanks for bearing with me as I went through Simona's slides there. Probably made a bit of a meal of it, just as she was more familiar with the content. But that's kind of our toolkit in a nutshell. Is there sort of any questions or comments? Keen to hear from colleagues. I know there's a lot of toolkits going on, being developed in the sector at the moment. So any sort of comments or questions would be.
Thank you so much, Juan, for that. There is a couple of questions or comments in the chat. So one of them is from Becky. So she's asked if you've looked at other initiatives and called Equip is one. Is that with inspiration? She's asked for more information about theory of change. If you could talk about that as well, that would be really helpful. And also a question from Sylvia was about it is mandatory to all staff. That's one of the questions I was going to ask as well. How are you going to ensure staff engage with it? If in terms of its importance to the institution. There's a few questions there you might want to, if you could kind of think about those, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not familiar with Equip, so that's it might, unless it's been so Simona and I are developing this ourselves. Claire has supported, who was a placement student who has really done a lot of work on this as well. But no, I'm not familiar with Equip. I will be looking at it once I come off here, because we're still developing the toolkit. So yeah, that's something I'll look at beyond this. In terms of theory of change, so Simona developed the theory of change for this particular project before I started, but I've done a lot of work in terms of developing theory of change as part of kind of monitoring and evaluation work. And the idea is kind of putting the evidence and the rationale behind what you're proposing to do. So what's the hypothesis really, and is there sector literature that backs that up, that backs up what you're proposing to do? Is there kind of internal evidence in terms of your context that also feeds into that? Why do you assume basically what you're proposing to do will work, and then how are you going to measure that over time? So it's about pulling that all together, and that's kind of where we went in terms of we need to speak to our students and understand what the scope of the challenges it is, speak to internal student-facing staff to understand what their perspective is, and kind of bring that all together to try and create a toolkit, and evaluate that every single year and speak to our students through surveys and focus groups to make sure that what we're doing actually is aligned, and if not, to change course really. I hope that's kind of helpful in answer to that.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I guess the other bit is how you ensure staff engage with it, because that's something that we, in my own institution, that's quite challenging, and having similar conversations about resources that we have, it's how, you know, whether it's mandatory, which is a really tricky term sometimes, or whether it's something about people's willingness just to kind of improve their practice. I don't know what your view is there from Staffordshire. I
would love to make it mandatory. I think it's the problem is with these things. There's so many initiatives. I think that we develop as an institution, that it's kind of keeping these prioritizing these in the right way, particularly when academics are being asked to do more with less. I think it's a common challenge across the sector. It's at the moment it's not mandatory, which is why we're going to be monitoring kind of how much it's being used. Our course monitoring and surveys, sort of internal surveys that we do, and NSS are going to be touch points to check whether this is making a difference, as well as those engagement statistics. That's not to say in future it might not be more of a priority for our exec and our board of governors. That's kind of where we have to go to in terms of whether we can make things mandatory or not. So targets haven't been created in that sense, but that's not to say it might not in future. And we've got the tools in place to kind of make that argument if we need to.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's pretty much all from the comments in the chat. I think Bigu's, is there a similar toolkit initiative for students? That's quite interesting.
Was that a question? Is there a toolkit for students? Yeah. So no, we did think about this long and hard before we developed this toolkit, and the idea was that is a different. So when we disseminated the findings of our research, we spoke to, for example, student admissions and recruitment and support services. So we sort of felt as a two-person team, who are both kind of academic developers and researchers really, rather than sort of deliverers of in a student-facing sense. We passed on those findings and hosted a discussion on how that could be used in practice. A student toolkit isn't something that's being developed by sort of student-facing teams, but what we kind of found is being used in terms of tailoring already existing sort of induction and welcome packages that international students have. So it is being used. It's just not in a sort of toolkit package, if that makes sense.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so thank you so much for your presentation and discussion. We've got 5 minutes, and then we will move on to Hannah, who's our next speaker. So everyone's got a 5-minute break.
Thanks so much.